We were pleasantly surprised with the house that we had rented when we got there. It was in the evening, and so what we did was get ready to go to bed and figured we'd look around the next morning. When we got up the next morning, it was a beautiful day. Here we are on this little island with no electricity, and I think there were three other homes on the island, same kind of homes that we had rented. Uh, the Boston whaler was down at the dock, and Bob was very excited to see it and anxious to start the motor and get us going because he was very much interested into sailing and boating at that time in his life. Uh, we were happy with the building and the equipment in it. It was a nice refrigerator that had been well stocked. It looked like we had food in it that would last us a week. And the kitchen seemed fine for cooking, and we were ready to start our adventure in the British Virgin Isles. I think the first thing we did was to get into the Boston whaler in our bathing suits and take a spin around and go to the nearest island that had a beach and try the ocean waters, and it was just delightful. It really seemed like we had landed in paradise. Back to, after the swim, was back to our house for lunch and cook some things that we were enjoying. And we were going to go for another swim in the afternoon. And in the meantime, Bob and Sheila informed us that they had brought some pot along with them. Mom had already tried pot back in Mahopac, but I hadn't, and they wanted to know if give me an opportunity to try it if I wanted to. And I said I was willing, so we kind of put that aside until the evening of the first day that we're there on the island. In the meantime, we walked around to look at the other houses, and we're back in the boat for another ride and then a swim. And back in time for afternoon cocktails before dinner. I don't remember what we cooked, but we were happy with our dinner, and it was time for me to try the pot. I think I had an open mind on it, and they had to show me how to inhale. I knew how to inhale, but because I had smoked for 30 years. But it was different here that you had to hold the smoke in, and rather than just smoke the pipe and then blow it out, the idea was to get it down in your lungs. And I tried and used up a lot of the pot, and it didn't seem to have any effect on me. I don't understand why, and neither did my three companions, but it was like, okay, that's what pot smoking is, but I didn't feel any different. We nevertheless had a pleasant evening and slept well and got ready for the next day. We followed this routine for a day or two, visiting nearby islands and swimming and looking for shells, of which there were all kinds of beautiful ones on the beaches. This being 50 years ago, the beaches were relatively clean and unspoiled. There wasn't a lot of waste material and plastic bottles and stuff floating around. It was just beautiful. We had heard about a little French restaurant on an island that was a few hundred yards from where we were staying, maybe a half a mile. And on the second or third evening, we went over there for dinner, and we found it to be a great little place, good food. French people were running it, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. I remember there was one item that Babe asked for. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they were out of it, or they hadn't prepared it for that day, and they said that they would gladly do so on a later day if we called and told them we were coming and asked for that particular dish. All of this was done by way of the Boston Whaler, and you have to remember that a Boston Whaler has low gunnels. In other words, there aren't high sides to the boat. And we were going through open ocean, and the waves could be 2 or 3 feet high, and Babe and I and Sheila allowed or depended on Bob's ability to run the boat and miss the waves and get us to where we were going. He thoroughly enjoyed that. After 3 or 4 days of going to the local islands, we decided that we would try to go over to Virgin Gorda, which had the famous Baths Beach, and was about a 10-mile trip across ocean waters, and with no intervening islands, so it was really open waters and big waves. And again, Bob was up to the task, and we held on and hoped for the best. he did a great job, and we got over to Virgin Gorda, a little wet from splashes, but otherwise safe. We came to this beach on Virgin Gorda that was just a beautiful little beach, but had these big boulders piled up at one end. We had been to this spot when Bob was 11, so it was about 6 years earlier, when we took the trip on the Maverick. And we were very happy to come back to this spot and have as much time as we wanted to stay and explore it, more time than we had on the Maverick. And it's an unforgettable place. And as I reminisce now, 50 years later, it's one of the highlights of my life to have been there and seen it and enjoyed it. We probably stayed a few hours and then had to take the trip back again 10 miles across the open seas in the Boston Whaler, and no mishap, and we got back safely. It was wonderful to get back to our little abode in time for cocktails and probably another attempt at enjoying the pot. I think the second time, for me, I did get some results from smoking. Did make me a little happier than I normally was, and enjoyed the sensation. I think that I always took it at the same time in the afternoon when we had drinks. So pot is enhanced by alcohol, and so as I got used to it, it seemed to be a little more enjoyable. After a day or so, we called the restaurant and asked them to prepare that dish that Babe had desired. And I can't remember what it was. It might have been venison or some conch dish, but whatever it was, we enjoyed it thoroughly. We enjoyed going back to that restaurant, and we even enjoyed getting a little wet because I think it rained that night, and we had to go through the rain and waves to get to the restaurant. At the end of the week, we were pretty much out of supplies, and we had to go to the big island of Tortola to buy stuff to fill our refrigerator with. It wasn't that simple. It meant going in a Boston Whaler for a couple of miles to the end of Tortola that was closest to us. And we had called and made a reservation with a taxi company for them to have a taxi at that point, at that pier, and then he could drive us into town which was probably 6 miles away from where we could land our Boston whaler. That was a pleasant ride. We saw what Tortola was like by driving through it, and came to the shopping area that the taxi driver said was the best place for us to replenish our supplies at. And we went in with big ideas about what we could buy, but what we found was that supplies were very limited, and our choices were of those things that they had on hand, not particularly what we wanted. So the four of us had to choose the things that we wanted to eat for the next week, and some fresh things, fresh food and produce and canned goods. And in those days we were eating ham and cheese. We were happy anyway with what we bought. We spent a couple of hours on that trip, and then the taxi driver took us back to our back to our little island where we landed safely. We spent the rest of the time that we had, which was about 6 days, going up to various islands in our Boston whaler and making another trip back to Virgin Gorda successfully again to the baths and to some other beaches on the island. And finally, at the end of 2 weeks, we were ready to go back to Tortola and the airport, and then St. Thomas, and then back to the United States. It was a memorable 2 weeks. It was the last time that the four of us had a vacation together, and it really worked out beautifully. Looking back over a 50-year period, I can only say that those 2 weeks were great, memorable, and my only regret is that we didn't do it more often in our lives. So as you are listening to me now in 2016, think about it. Your life on earth is short, and you have to take advantage of every time you can to get together, have fun, see new things, enjoy yourself.